Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast, a podcast dedicated to the exploration and cultivation of the outside genius found in neurodivergence.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast. I am your host, Lillian Skinner. Thanks for joining me today. This is our third podcast, and we're going to talk about 3D thinking, 3D perceptions, 3D learning, 3D sensing. We started with 2D in the last one, and 2D was the decision tree where it's decided for you. There are no choices. That's how our systems work. They give you the decisions, and you just regurgitate them. But those of us who have high sensing, we are 3D thinkers, in part because we have so much attachment to our subconscious. Think of a time that you have actually been in touch with your subconscious. And I can think of the best example of being when you had a sudden loss of something. It can be a person, it can be a pet, it can be a move, but there's some sort of upset in your daily patterns of life. And you are now missing that part. And you can feel, you know that it's gone in your intellectual side, but you're not yet used to it on your patterns of day. Keep expecting that space to be filled by something or someone, and it's not. And your brain just can't wrap around it for a while. And it is because that is your subconscious brain coming up and saying, hey, that person's going to be here. Hey, this person's going to be there. This should be filled now. And it's not going to happen because that is not a part of your life. And it takes a while for that immersive pattern to get filled in. I ran into that when to an extreme degree, when I had a miscarriage. My brain had wrapped around this miscarriage quite quickly. I thought it was a fortunate event, but I actually was sort of relieved by it because the repercussions of having this unhealthy pregnancy come to fruition would have been quite disastrous for me. So I was resolved to this as soon as I realized it. But my body didn't. My body was not aware of that brain recognition. It just kept going through the motions of all of this stuff, even though the feelings of sadness that were coming through my body went to my brain, and my brain was like, no, we're okay with this. It's just this watching this back and forth, this ebb and flowing of my body and my brain. And it drove home very, very clearly to me that I definitely have two functioning in my body and my brain. And they are not always in the same space together. They definitely have their own way of seeing the world, and they go back and forth. When I was in school as a child, I would regularly have my subconscious saying, that's not true. Why are they making you do this? This doesn't seem like it has any real purpose. And I was labeled sort of a bad attitude kid. Now, it was because I wasn't a cheery student. I wasn't a cheery student. I hated sitting there all day. I was tired. I was bored. I was frustrated. I was overwhelmed. And I wasn't a delight. I'll admit it. I was not the most delightful person. I mostly tried to just be nice and quiet. But sometimes my frustration at the teacher and what she was telling me, and I knowing that it wasn't accurate or true or didn't reflect my experiences, probably slipped out. What are you talking about? But that's what I wore on my face. I didn't ever say that aloud, but that's what I wore on my face. I know as a child when they would try to shame us and tell us, oh, you need to be acting like young ladies and gentlemen and not boys and girls, and you're in second, third, fourth, fifth grade. And they'd be like, but we are boys and girls. Now, I didn't say that out loud, but I sure as heck, what do you want from us? We're a bunch of kids. We're supposed to act like kids. You're taking away our childhood by acting like this. Of course, I never said that, but I sure as heck felt that. I felt that at church. I felt that at school. I felt that everywhere I was told to be something I'm not, which is pretty much all the time. I believe that it is this that is actually imposter syndrome. It is your branches. It is that trauma of not fitting in and being what the system tells you to be. And then you get out there and you achieve what you were told you never could achieve. And you have this dissonance, a cognitive dissonance that says, wait a second, I was told I couldn't do this, and yet I did. There, I've proven it wrong, but it still feels weird. And that's your body, brain, your brainstem, your cerebellum, getting used to and changing your pattern because you just proved that pattern differently. And that is also why when we go out into the world, it is so much harder for us to change those patterns and for us to work through that. And we're in an anxiety state, moving through that, proving that pattern wrong. When I was in unhealthy relationships, I would actually actively seek the opposite of them because I felt if I seek the opposite of them, then I will eventually find what healthy is. And it worked for me. However, it was very anxious ridden. I felt very out of my element. And you know how that is. The higher your sensitivity, the more you need to be in your element. But it did work out. Another thing I did as a youngster, in my early 20s, I would call my parents and ask them what they would do in the situation. And then whatever they'd tell me, especially if they both agreed because they were divorced and never talked, I'd do the opposite of, because my parents had not had a good adult life. They had a very indulged childhood, and then in their adult life, they were manifesting all sorts of dysfunction. And so I would ask them and then do the opposite. And it worked. It worked every stinking time. But there was so much anxiety in it because I didn't want to repeat their errors, but I also didn't know, there's a whole potential for others. So I do believe in that two brains. My conscious brain would always say, don't do what they did. And my subconscious brain was, hey, these are these patterns out there. And I would go back and forth trying to decide what to do. We use all these experiences to build these divergent thinking. And if you're familiar with somatic healing, you know that people will actually activate the body to release it to your brain so that you can see the whole picture. I don't understand somatic healing particularly well because I have never needed it. My brain really does have access to my subconscious in a clear way that sort of allows it up there. That way I've always been able to heal. My autism has helped me heal. I think that we lose sight of the fact that high sensitivity means that you are going to have that reaction in the moment that other people will maybe not have for 20 years. I'm watching this in my own family. My siblings are experiencing trauma that we had as a child that I have moved through because I moved through it at the point and I was very clear on it. And they will say she was right, but she shouldn't have handled it the way she did. Well, whatever. It's trauma that I dealt with in the moment. They have not gotten through it yet because they were able to contain it, but that containing it was harmful. I think that we should be recognized for the fact that our high sensitivity is actually healthy. It is serving us. It has served me my whole life. It has gotten me out of situations I really should not have been in. I grew up with parents who were musicians. I was put on the stage all the time. I was a high fashion model as a teenager. I hated it. There is never a point where I will ever get comfortable being on a stage. I cannot accept all those inputs. We didn't understand that I was quite as neurodivergent, but we did. Everyone was always trying to put me back in the box of convergence. Why can't you be normal? I can't. I just can't. It's never going to work for me. I am not normal. And the more you try to make me, the more divergence I have and the more trauma branches I have. But it's okay because I learned so much in my trauma. It allowed me to really live a much healthier adult life than if I had not had it. In fact, I am fortunate for it. Of course, in that moment, I sure as heck didn't feel that way. But in retrospect, I've saved myself and I've learned drastically, quickly, so many different perspectives. And it has allowed me to move through the world a much healthier, much more calm adult. That is what happens with the trauma and the multiple branches on your divergent thinking and your decision trees. Now, if we look at the definition of disability, there's a lot to be known just in that, how our system prevents us from being normal. ChatGPT has defined disability as impairment of learning or motivation. And I realized that I had never seen that motivation part. But I definitely do have impairment of motivation. I did not have impairment of learning. I am definitely not extrinsically motivated very well. I don't care about things that much. I care about comfortable, living. I care about having a roof over my head and food on the table, but I'm not a big foodie. I'm not a big thing person. I make a lot of the stuff I enjoy because I like it a certain way and I don't find it out there. I like it to be the way I like it. I make it because I enjoy making things and it helps me sit still and it helps me focus and knock out this podcast and research and learn, and it gives me something to do with my hands. This is very normal if you were looking at an egalitarian society where everybody is an artisan, everybody's making, everybody's doing things, and they have roles. And some people have very specific roles and some people have generic roles, but we would be doing many things. We've forgotten that multi-potential light is actually normal. We have acted like it's abnormal, but it's completely, utterly normal. And the more trauma you have, the more divergent thinking you have, the more you're going to know that you have a multi-potential light personality. We should be going into that. The very cool thing, though, is that it increases your intelligence having all those experiences because it increases your divergence. And as we walk into our next era that we're quickly moving into, with AI, you will want your divergence. You will celebrate your divergence. So the 3D perspective living and learning is going to be something that is an asset, because convergence will be so easy to find. It'll be just a matter of asking a question, your phone or Alexa or something like that. We don't actually need us creating all these regurgitating things. That's documents that AI can do. Now they're going to actually want our divergence. But we should not be coming in as disabled. We should be coming in a situation that serves us, because for too long the system hasn't served us, and we deserve a space that is safe. We have to have a space that is safe. We have to have a space that is not being exploitive. I think that our system is really broken for the neurodivergence. We don't even know what healthy is for neurodivergence. And it doesn't matter how healthy I get, how much my life is cleaned up, how peaceful my world is and my family is. I still get told that there's something wrong with me. I still get told that you have this issue. I take my kid in for the psychiatrist, and if they're not a neurodivergent psychiatrist, I'm guaranteed that they're gonna write things up on us that are really normal for our being and healthy as dysfunctional. And I'm really, really tired of that. I'm really tired of being told by the system that I am off, that I am wrong for my healthy. I think the fact that we have system disability that's impairment of learning or motivation, the fact that it's motivation when I am incredibly motivated intrinsically, I'm just not motivated extrinsically, they don't recognize intrinsic as healthy, they recognize extrinsic as healthy. But it proves my point that we are not supposed to be in the system. It proves my point that we are gifted, and that in order for us to find healthy, we have to positively disintegrate. The whole premise of positive disintegration is that you are a gifted person, you're an outlier, that you cannot fit. And the only way to find your place is to create your place. You get out and you make your own path. And that has been my whole point. Our sensitivity is a gift. Our ability to have super focus, have special interest, those are gifts. Those are the same things identified in giftedness. Yet for us, they won't recognize it. Well, why won't they recognize it? Well, how about we look at Renzulli's website? They have a really nice 3-ring circle conception of giftedness. And the first thing in it is convergent thinking. It's above average ability. Now, I do score above average and moderately gifted on IQ tests, but it is not because I'm getting tested properly. That's convergent thinking. It's testing your ability to regurgitate the right answer. That's convergence. It's convergent thinking. The next section is creativity, and that is the divergent thinking. So they think, well, we have it balanced because we have convergent and divergent. Well, not truly, because I am so divergent that my convergent thinking is impaired. This is how it's impaired. It's impaired on the easiest levels. It's the hard is simple, simple is hard for neurodivergents, particularly autistics. Those of us who have such convergent thinking, that we have such creativity, that we see so many different branches that are not on our 2D trunk, we are never going to do as well as we ought to on those above average ability. I remember listening through a talk with Dr. Linda Silverman, who does the profound giftedness research, and her big belief is that sensitivity drives our giftedness. She was saying that when she tests children, some children will show a struggling in the earlier parts. And I said to her, well, what do you think that is? And she said, well, I just think they're trying to figure out how to do it. I don't think that's so. I believe that they can't actually understand it because it's too simple, because that had been my problem. It's my problem with my children as well. We do pretty poorly on the early parts, and then we kick butt and take names on the harder parts. But the reason we do that is because we are divergent thinkers. The more specific you get, the more we're going to understand the question and be able to answer correctly. It is the generic questions, it is the simple ones that we see too many options and we get them wrong. That is our creative thinking. That is our giftedness. But they don't want to see it. The third circle for the 3 rings of conception of giftedness is task commitment. Again, we're going to fail this part because we have task commitment based on our intrinsic, not extrinsic. And if you're sitting in a test, it is going to be extrinsic. Well, that makes me go into a spiral of anxiety because I am so upset, but I have no joy over it. It's just fear and worry and anxiety. I don't like to be extrinsically forced into things. I think there's so much of this is just a matter of intrinsic versus extrinsic. If you give me a topic I like, I will kill myself on that topic. I don't care what grade you give me. I actually just care about learning. I have such a reward system for learning, thanks to my gifted neurodivergence, that the payoff's huge. It's like an oxytocin hit for us to research and learn. When I figure out something, I can feel it in my brain click into place like a last piece in a big, huge puzzle. And then I get this huge oxytocin rush. I feel really happy and my brain floods with relief because up until that point, I've been anxious. I've been trying to figure it out. I have been curious. When I find it, it's relief. It's a flood of oxytocin. I hit a dopamine high. It's all these wonderful things. You do not need to externally motivate me to learn. I'm sitting here doing all this research. I'm not even getting paid for this, and yet I'm choosing to do it because I just enjoy it. I feel the need to do it. There is an intrinsic motivation making me create this world that I am creating right now. That is why I think we are left out, because the very person identifying and defining what is giftedness has left us out in two areas. They only have creative as 1/3 part, and they don't even know how to measure that right now. I know how to measure it. You know how to measure it. I can come up with 1,000 ways to measure it. But since we are not in the system, we can't measure it. But that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to build our own way. And that's the whole goal. So I have built my own way. What I have is this model of gifted neurodivergence that involves 3 circles, just like theirs, but it includes sensitivity, empathy, and focus. And sensitivity, I do believe that Linda is correct, that sensitivity drives it. And this is why. Because empathy comes from your sensitivity. My sensitivity drives my curiosity, my wanting to know, my empathy for things. Mine is driven for people. I can do a lot of things. I worked in tech. It's not very people-driven at all. I've worked in many other things in my life that were not people-driven. The truth is, I think people are the most fascinating things in the world. But when I went into school and I was taking psychology classes, I was frustrated. My divergent thinking was saying, no, this isn't correct. I don't like this. I left and I got a different degree. I got a degree in business because the truth is, I believe that we can find out the information we need to know on our own. Thank you to so much technology. Thank you to AI. Thank you to all these resources that we didn't have in other generations. I have been on the IT bandwagon since childhood. I was an IT professional in a high school job. I don't know exactly how I ended up doing that. I think it's just sheer curiosity, and they were like, this person seems to be interested, we'll make her do it. And that's how it started. I have been in IT since I was a kid, and so it was sort of a natural extension for me. But it wasn't really that I was into IT, it's just that I was curious, and I was a self-starter, and I was a self-learner. And my school record probably doesn't reflect that, but my work record does. In work, people were always aware. They're like, wow, you read a lot of books. You show a lot of things. You understand this better than anybody else. Because our system measures your 2D knowledge. It doesn't measure your deep knowledge. And that is the difference. 3D knowledge is whole knowledge. It's understanding it thoroughly. And you can see this. You can see people who are really, really bright, and yet they will be stumped on things that this other kid in the back of the classroom is like, oh, because that kid has 3D knowledge. And when you have 3D knowledge, you can say that it is not true that somebody's telling you. You feel that it's not true. 3D knowledge is more complete data. We are telling these kids who learn 3D knowledge, who are not convergent, that they're less than when they are more than. That is a problem. I think that's really dysfunctionally wrong. Our system is dysfunctional. Our system is based on average being the normal, the good, the best way to be. And it is also placed on working and producing as being the normal and the best way to be. If you listen to anyone who talks about giftedness, they'll talk about how the productivity portion of giftedness is not in the best interest of the gifted. The gifted need freedom. The gifted need to positively disintegrate. We are the highest gifted people. We have to get out of the system to get in touch with our intrinsic motivation. We have to get out so that we can actually allow our sensitivity to drive our empathy to help our focus. Empathy is your special interest, and focus is your super focus. All we need is high sensitivity. Guess what? There, we're done. We already have it. We have high sensitivity. All that stuff about genius working hard, all that stuff about all the motivation of genius, you have it. You just don't have it in the system, and neither did genius. I'm going to tell you a story about Einstein. I read this in this book. I think the book was called Einstein and His Friends, but I don't remember exactly. And I can, if I find it, I'll put it up there. It was talking about how Einstein and his friends all came over from Europe, and they were working in the physics department, except for Einstein. He didn't. He did a little consulting for, I think, the Navy, but the rest of them all went to Los Alamos lab, and they were building the atomic bomb. And he didn't. He came over and worked a job at Princeton. They had said Einstein had lost his genius. He lost his genius at the end of his 40s. He didn't lose his genius. What he saw was what was coming. He saw how this was handled in Germany and how they were being locked up and rounded up. And then he came to the US and he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And guess what? That happened. It's called the Red Scare. And all of those physicists were then put into jail later because they were a risk. Einstein, however, didn't. He had positively disintegrated. He never lost his genius. He used his genius to see what was coming and bowed out because he knew the system wasn't out for him. He did his part as much as he could, and then he checked out. And he wrote his tail feathers down to the end. In the book, they talk about one student who called him, and he knew right away what it was. And he was in his 80s. And the student said, he didn't lose his genius, if you ask me. No, he didn't lose his genius. He positively disintegrated. Because up until that point, he'd been serving the group. He hadn't been taking care of himself. If you want to reach your full potential, if you want to be the entrepreneur, if you want to be successful, you have to positively disintegrate because the system actually works against you every step of the way. The reason your sensitivities are triggered is it's not a healthy space, and you are intrinsically knowing of healthy. You intrinsically need this. Let's find a way to get you out because you have this potential for genius, and it will be on the outside. It will not be on the inside. Now that we have that part, let's talk about why we need to be taught in 3D specifically. We talked about the deeper understanding, the enhanced understanding, but it's also retention. 3D is not just what you're talking about manipulating, this idea that it's all things that you handle and it's all spatial. It's more than that. For those of us who are language people, for those of us who are empaths, it's also emotions. All of us 3D thinkers are emotional. We use our emotions to store and retrieve our stuff from our long-term memory, from our subconscious. We need to use and be in touch with our emotions as part of the learning. I can remember back to infancy. I can remember my entire childhood if I bring up the emotion with it. If I bring up a song, that will bring up the emotion. We have triggers. We have prompts if you must. If it's like an artistic brain, the artistic brain is the subconscious brain. It has higher access to your subconscious because it uses those little prompts. We are prompt driven. This is why we're night owls. Because we are prompt driven. I cannot get up in the morning and start working immediately. I need prompts. If I schedule my mornings full of meetings, so I get prompts from people. And in the afternoon, I hole up and I use the prompts I had from earlier in the day and I can create. We are creators. We live with our subconscious driving the bus. I told you earlier that my subconscious has always been there. It protects me. It is very much the leader of my body. It drives me places I don't get a choice. I would like to think that my conscious is the higher level one, but it isn't. I know for a fact that my subconscious is constantly delivering me from situations, and it is always right. I told you it's about that patterns you build. You have to build those healthy ones. In the beginning, it was constantly battling, and now I've allowed it to connect with my conscious, and they're in peace, they're in harmony, and my conscious and my subconscious work together all the time, sort of taking it in, helping me understand the big picture, and really making these giant connections that I'm making on this podcast, that I'm making in my life to make my family healthy, because there's nothing out there for us. The literature on us is that we're dysfunctional, but we're not. We're the opposite of dysfunctional. We're trying to find functional. Everything in our body is screaming to get us there. Personalization and real world relevance are the last two things I'm going to just talk about for 3D. We need 3D because it is unique to us. Because we have such complex patterns, because we have so much access to our subconscious, education needs to be personal. And it means really that we drive it. Our emotions sit in the seat and give us our super focus and give us our special interest. It's our emotions that drive it. It's our empathy. We have that sensitivity, which gives us all these inputs about something that leads to our empathy, which gives us our special interest, which gives us our super focus. They are all working together. We are 3D thinkers, and if we are not working with our subconscious as that third part, you're on a stool with two legs. All right, we don't have motivation and we don't have learning in that thing because they're not letting us bring our long-term memory, which is really the powerhouse of our thinking. What does it look like? What is that 3D thinking in language? It's recognizing all the different layers. It's story. We need story. I have to have story because stories give me context of emotions, and emotions tell me so much more than what the actions are. Emotions are my savant gift. Emotions are how I dig into the souls of other people. Like I feel other people more than I feel my own emotions. My introspection is pretty high, but my emotions from other people are much higher. Hello, empaths. You know what I'm talking about. We feel the world outside us. We feel it. We have mirror touch synesthesia. We have all these things that make us able to see and know. See and feel. I'm talking about story. We're not talking about just the physical. We're all talking about the spatial. So the spatial for language is
is feelings, it's context, it's metaphor, it's analogy, it's all these things, it's historical and cultural context, it's the nuances and tones of intonation, it's all those things that you can see and feel, it's theater. That is the 3D portions of language. How about the 3D portions of math? Well, math is definitely the visual spatial portion, but also in science, it's the understanding of, layers and how science kind of comes together. It's visualizing the shapes, it's visualizing the different layers, it's visualizing, in some cases, the space, outer space. We have an understanding relationship of how 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D. I give an example of my husband. He is a scientist, he's an inventor, and his smelling is definitely more than 3D. He will sit down next to me and say, "What are you wearing?" And I'll be just wearing this lotion. And I can smell the different compounds in it. I can smell the natural and artificial flavors. He will break down the chemical formula based on the smell. Now that is really amazing, multi-dimensional thinking with his nose. I mean, he's applying a science dimension of thinking. He is able to do that because he has a high sensitivity in his smell. Music. We've talked about music, but music 3D thinking is you taking a mixing board and mixing music, ability to make all those layers. A lot of these people are not educated to do this. They figure it out on their own because they're natural 3D thinkers in music. They're natural rhythmists. I think most rappers that are really good are natural savants. They're musical savants, because my sister, who's a musical savant, who has decided not to go into music, but will show up and do backup singing and sing these intricate harmonies, and never went to school for music. Really didn't even last that long in the elementary school music program and middle school music program. She writes poems every day, several poems a day. I mean, it manifests in many ways. Rhythm is one of them. So the layering part, I really understand. And think about it. This is a gift that you would have no matter where you are. Music is really important. People need music. Music helps you store memory. It helps you bring up emotion. It's how we pass oral tradition. And oral tradition is another thing too. I read somewhere that oral tradition is actually more accurate than written tradition. Why would that be? But then it occurred to me, written tradition is easier to destroy. Oral tradition is harder because it's in the person. It's in everything. It's in all of the things we make. It's oral tradition is passed down in symbols, and it's in your hair and your style of clothing. It's in your rugs and your things that you've made for your household, your cups, your tables. Oral tradition is very much a 3D perspective. Written is too. It's in these books. If you burn those books, you've destroyed that history. And we have done that many, many times. We've destroyed 1 million history. But in order to destroy the Native Americans' history, we had to destroy their people. We had to destroy the very structure of their environment. We did horrible things to them because their oral history was trapped in the people. And this will help you understand why written history is so much easier. You can just wipe it out. It's gone. But oral tradition is so important. It's so powerful because it's actually in the person. Art is like the math, and I do think art giftedness is an extension. I think art and math is the same giftedness, but it's almost like your dopamine's levels, like how high is your dopamine? My children and myself, we are creators when our dopamine's low, and when we're intellectuals when it's high. And I think this is very interesting because my intellectualism is definitely dopamine's higher in the evening for me. In the morning, I just want to sort of draw or create things. I'm carving things all the time, but in the evening time, I don't do that. In the evening time, I'm actually just focusing on my podcast. I'm focusing on my research. I'm focusing on thinking things because that's when my dopamine is higher. Again, back to the prompts. So art is the ability to see 3D. I liked watching my children try to create 3D images in art when they were little. They were actually actively trying to do that shadowing. They were really amazing at it. And it was cool to watch them know and get frustrated and try to figure that out before they were ever taught a lesson. Next thing is the emotion. They talk about emotional intelligence. This is not the emotional intelligence that they talk about in business. This is it, but it's more maybe the true or pure form. The emotional intelligence we're talking about business is the emotional intelligence of someone who serves. It's knowing what your master wants, your boss, your teacher. That emotional intelligence does not serve you. And there is a healthy balance where you meet the needs of those you work with, but you also meet your own needs. And you should really be meeting your needs first. Yes, neurodivergence, you don't need to kill yourself for everyone. We are taught that we should, absolutely part of the whole message, especially the empaths. It is not in your best interest. You will never find healthy if you're constantly serving others, then beating yourself up for it. That's not what true emotional healthy functioning is. Healthy functioning is knowing the balance. It's saying this person, I can tell that they're genuine in their emotions.
I tell my children when they're young, 3 years old, you are going to be hurt by your friends because we are deeper sensing people. So please feel where they're at and do not go past them. Do not love them past they love you, because you will be hurt by that. And do you know they grasp that at 3 years old? They understand what I'm saying. And that is the emotions portions of this. You have to understand how to protect yourself in a world that has less emotional depth than you. Have to reach out those feelings and sort of know who you can bring in and who you can't. The last thing is empathy. Now, empathy is what we cultivate, so we learn what our gifts are. Empathy is something that we all have if we are spatially gifted, if we are a neurodivergent. If you're a gifted neurodivergent, you have empathy in different areas. Your sensitivities drive your empathy. I've already said this, but I'm saying it again because it is that important. Your sensitivities drive your empathy. Your empathy is your curiosity, your need to know of areas that you're interested in. It is driven by your higher sensing because you have more data and you're going to notice all the divergence from what you're told, and it will make you just think, ooh, I think that was wrong. Ooh, I think that was wrong. That is how I found my way down this path. It's how I found that I was being told things that were not true about the way I needed to be in the world, the healthy way for me. This is what caused me to positively disintegrate. My empathy for finding what was best for myself. My empathy was what kept saying, this isn't going to work for me. This doesn't work. I need to keep going in my way. And I got there because of my empathy, because of my super focus, because of my sensitivities. Emotions have to be allowed back in. If that's one thing that you're going to take away from this podcast, is we need emotions back in the classroom. We need them because the 2D thinkers who are neurodivergent are losing their minds. It is not a small wonder to me that we have so many neurodivergent men who fit in that 2D perspective and lose their minds, because you know what? They do everything they're supposed to do at a really high cost to them that the system tells them, because they're so close to the 2D perspective. And at some point, and it seems to be getting younger, that they realize that the system will never pay off. It will never actually deliver. And they're working so hard to be it, and they lose their minds and they go crazy. If you know anyone, like my father's like this, there's so many men out there who are broken because they have done everything they were supposed to do, and they are mad at everyone because it didn't work out. But the system isn't supposed to work out. It's supposed to be navigated with a savvy that it's really not out there to help you. That's why narcissists do so well in it. They're using it for them. They have figured out that the system is about control, and they're using it against everyone else. We, though, who are high sensing, who are empaths, who care and have a lot of empathy, we don't figure that out. We don't figure it out till way too late, or we're just not capable. I can't manipulate people. I can't do it. I care about them. If you're going to manipulate me, I will step up and do it, and we'll go toe to toe. I always want to do best by other people. I am fair. This is part of giftedness. We are fair-minded people. Those of us who get broken, they were fair-minded at some point, and then they realized that this is all against them. And they're right. It's using them. It's exploiting them. They're angry for legitimate reasons, but there is a way to deal with it that is healthy. It's positively disintegrating. It's not blowing up the world. It's not putting the kibosh on things. It's positively disintegrating as soon as possible. I know so many young men who are brilliant, really wonderful, sweet, just wonderful. And they are so lost, and they're being told to be something they just can't be. They're losing their minds. And they're supposed to be what they are. They're supposed to be exactly who they are. They just need to be taught how to use all those tools they have. We have so many skills as neurodivergents. We have all these extra skills that other people don't even know they have and will never cultivate, but we do because we're sitting with them so accessible with our subconscious. Now, my next podcast is actually going to talk about that. I am going to talk about my amazing skills that I have as a savant that have saved lives, because I have the ability to feel other people to such a degree I can get in front of it and stop things from happening. So I will talk about that. I'm going to ask you to talk about yours, because I made this podcast so that we can finally find out all the skills we were denied and really unfold. Change is coming. We're going to experience more change in the next 10 years than we have in the last 100. And I'm going to keep saying this every time. Our gifts are what we're going to use to counter the change, to figure out ways to work with it. We can't stop the rest of the world from what they're doing, but we can change ourselves, and we can fix whatever we need to and get in touch with all of our skills that we have been denied. Because you're amazing. All that high sensing, all that super focus, all that special interest, that is sheer giftedness, is the highest levels. and we're going to open those amazing skills up, and we're going to start cultivating them, because that's my purpose. So thank you so much for listening to the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast. I'm wishing you the best.
This podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent Gifted ND Incorporated, Lillian Skinner, or the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast. This podcast, Lillian Skinner, and Gifted ND Incorporated are not responsible and do not verify the accuracy of the information contained in this podcast series. The primary purpose of this podcast is to inform and educate. The Gifted Neurodivergent podcast is only available for private, non-commercial use. Any other use of the information contained within this podcast must be done with express written approval and knowledge of Lillian Skinner. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute any part of this podcast. The developer assumes no liability for this podcast or its use on any other podcast or other media.